Noise gates. Same thing as normal. You will download a couple different things. Right here we have the logic session. We have the instructions for this assignment. We have a video that, right now, since you're live with me right now, I'll be explaining this. This is kind of doing the same thing. And then, again, your grading checklist. You'll notice this one is track 4. You're going to gate the audio. In other words, remove the noise. You're going to remove the noise. You'll have a screenshot of that. You'll also do track 5. You're going to gate the audio on that one. Remove the noise from that one. And a screenshot of that, as well as also the Logic Pro session. You'll have to turn that in and remember to name it. In other words, your last name underscore your first name, RPR Gates. And this will be the one that, has all of the stuff that we're walking you through in that assignment. So let's go take a look at that one. I'm going to show you first what gating basically does. Here you can see, audio-wise, we have a snare. These are the snares. When you record a live drum kit, you have a microphone that sits on the snare that's picking up the snare. But because of the proximity to the other drum parts, the kick, the hi-hat, and the cymbals, and all the other stuff that the drummer is playing at the same time, that microphone will pick up everything. Now, because it's closest to the snare, we're going to get the most dynamic range off of the snare drum itself. Again, going back to dynamic range, remember I said you want to capture the greatest amount of dynamic range between the noise floor and your instrument that you're recording without going into the peaking level where we're actually clipping signal. So this is another tool that will be able to be used, but we need that dynamic range. If my snares are just as loud as the noise that is in that room, because I didn't have enough level, well, then my gate won't be able to work correctly. So having a nice dynamic range on my recorded signal will help you enormously. So back to here, you could see a nice dynamic range on that snare versus the noise. You can see here perfectly. There's noise area. Large level difference. My gate will work with the threshold again, and I'll show you the other parameters, but the threshold will basically set up so that way I get rid of any signal that is not above the threshold. My gate will open and close. Think of it as it's cutting off the audio whenever there is no snare. So here's my input, here's my output. You could see it's cleaned up. All I have is snares. Got rid of all the other stuff. And I'm going to show you how to do this physically. But just to show you graphically how you can take that same signal and edit out without having to physically go and edit everything, using a gate to get rid of the noise. Let's open up the session file. First thing you'll notice, that snare. Same one I was talking about, and you just heard it earlier. Now, everybody should be hearing that snare, but do you also hear the hi-hat? You should also hear kick, and then every once in a while, a nice cymbal. Right there, that cymbal. So, here's the problem. Sure, I've got a snare on that track. Yeah, the other stuff is there, but it's not as loud, so I can mix it. We call that bleed, the noise that's on there. But what if I wanted to add something like a delay to the snare? A delay, you'll be learning about that time-based effects later. But a delay is basically the same sound, just happening later in time. You've heard it on tons of songs. You've heard it on snares. You've heard it on vocals. You'll hear it, like, for instance, where it says, yeah, and then, yeah, yeah, yeah. Softer. Each delay bounce. Now imagine if I run this through a delay. I would get those snares delayed, yes, but I also get those kicks, the hi-hats delayed. This track would be a mess. Versus if I only had the snare, then cool, I could make it so that the snare is the only thing delayed. The other thing is, well, with that extra noise, if you think about it, that's just the snare track. When I record a full drum kit, the amount of bleed that happens between all the mics can be overwhelming. We could make a mix still, yes, but then it won't be as clean as possible. I can clean this up by removing all the noise off of each track that doesn't belong on there. So on the snare track, we'd want to get rid of the kick, the hi-hats, the cymbals. On the kick track, we'd want to get rid of, well, I want to get rid of the snares. I want to get rid of the cymbals. I want to get rid of the hi-hats. I only want the kick on the kick track, the snare on the snare track, and so forth. So I could clean up my drums altogether. And that's where gates are used a lot, is in drums. Later, you could use gates for other stuff as well. But for now, know that drums for sure need gates. So let's try doing this together. Let me show you. Right now I have a gate on there. Oops, it's on my other screen. There we go. Notice the threshold is now set to 100 dB. So minus 100 dB. So it's way in the opposite side, because what this does is it tells the gate to physically open. This is even below the noise floor. So that means that this gate will stay open always, because there's always going to be some sort of noise that triggers it. I'm going to change this to 0, and I'm going to change this also to 0. I'll explain what these guys do, which are a great feature, but let's go to the basics first. Threshold tells the gate when to physically open. At minus 100, you can see it stays open. I hear the snare and all its noise. Let's go to the opposite range. 0. You can see it's playing, but I don't hear anything. Why? Because nothing is opening the gate. The level of the signal of those snares never triggers the threshold. If I start bringing back this threshold, eventually we start hearing stuff. Right there. Now, you heard, that sounds horrible. That's not usable. It's just click, click, click. It's only the attack, because I've got my threshold. But my gate is trying to open and then close really quick. With a threshold of minus 7, it's just enough to trigger that gate. The next knob right here, the reduction, that tells it how many dB we want of gain reduction. Unlike where the compressor worked off of a ratio, this just tells it, okay, I don't care what level above the threshold it is. Whenever the signal is below the threshold, I want it brought down to where we can't hear it anymore. In other words, it gets rid of the noise. It's gating out the noise. You could set this to 0, and you'll see, well, there's no gain reduction. So I hear the snare and all its noise again. Yes, I could set this a little less, but then it doesn't bring down the noise enough. Normally, and I mean probably 98% of the time, your gain reduction will always be at minus 100. There are only a few times that you actually do set this to be less, and I'll explain. We actually have a vocal track I'm going to show you. But for now, let's just do this. We're going to take this track, and we want only the snares. We left off at, it's just these little clicks. Not very usable. Here is here is where we start using these parameters. You remember from the compressor, we had an attack and a release. Well, this one has an attack, a release, and a hold. Now, what this does, the attack, is in milliseconds, how much time after the threshold is triggered does it take to bring this down minus 100 dB. So if I have this at 0, you saw it is instant. It basically, opens up and you get that little click sound. If I take that attack and increase it, it will take X number, like here 11 milliseconds, to physically hit that minus 100. Now, it's still too quick, right? We got rid of the click sound, but it's still not a full snare sound. So I'm going to go to the other parameters. My hold, what it tells it is once the threshold has been opened up, the gate opens up, and my level goes below the threshold, instead of it closing, I want it to hold open for X number of milliseconds. So here you can see, I'm going to shorten this a little bit. 60 milliseconds. You can now hear what sounds like a snare. But it cuts off a little quick. So maybe I want more. But it still sounds kind of unnatural because it's cutting it off really quick. So that's where my release comes into play. I'm going to bring back this hold back to that 50, 60 milliseconds because it sounded good, but I don't want it to go from the minus, or I should say from 0 gain reduction to the minus 100 gain reduction instantly. I want it to take its time. So currently, right now we have it, so it opens, it takes 5 seconds to hit, as far as the open spot, where it opens up to full volume. That means it creates a little bit of a fade, getting rid of any clicking sound that might happen. Then I'm holding it, once the threshold gets crossed again, 50 milliseconds. It holds the gate open. And then lastly, I'm going to add release to allow the natural decay of that snare to pass through. It's almost like I'm trying to follow the natural decay. So you can see that's just too quick. Add some release. See how it's starting to sound more natural? I'm getting more of the natural decay of the snare. Now, if I start going too far, I'm going to start hearing hi-hats and the other stuff. Watch this. Especially over here. You hear that single hi-hat making it through? So at that point, I know I've gone too far. I've added too much release. So I'm going to bring this back just to where it sounds natural. There we go. We got a nice looking snare, or nice sounding snare. So you can see a noise gate's pretty simple. We don't have to sit here and think about it, well, let's change the nuances and so forth. All we need to do is kind of use our tool here, our noise gate, to get the gate to open and close so that only the snare sound passes through. And then you use your envelope, right here, the attack, the release, and the hold, to make it follow the sound of that snare. So you're following that snare sound. Let me zoom in here a little bit. Kind of show you up close. So imagine that's your attack. I gave it a little bit of a, where it fades it in, allows it full volume. And then it's open. It holds it for a certain amount of time, but then the release brings it down in volume If I have it really quick, it cuts off this reverb tail. If I have it last longer, like there's 240 milliseconds, it's lasted all the way to here. By then, the reverb tail has fully decayed, and I have not gotten to my next sound, which is the hi-hat. So we tailor this envelope to follow that sound. So when I hit play, all I get is snares with their natural decay. Now I could send this snare to a delay unit, and I only get a delayed snare, which sounds wonderful, versus having the snare, having the hi-hats and all the other stuff, and it just becomes a big mishmash of different sounds all bouncing. Here I have control over just that snare. I also clean up my track. By doing this to each sound in, let's say, a drum kit, you clean up that drum kit to make it sound better. You can have more control over its placement and everything. Otherwise, you have bleed and noise on all these tracks that together sums up, and it just doesn't sound as tight as far as the drum kit. So as you can see, a gate is pretty simple. Now, what else can I use gates for? Let's show you a gate here on the vocal. Let's bypass this gate. I'm going ahead. I like to just zero it. I start off here, and then I tailor it to the sound. Hit play. All right, right now, being 0, it never, opens.
Oh, there's
Opposite.
no doubt or deny.
Let's start.
Let your light shine for all to see. Start a fire in my soul, fan the flame and make it grow. So there's no doubt or deny. Let it burn.
All right, now I'm using that vocal on purpose. I did change the vocal a little bit for this assignment. I added level to every one of her breaths. So you notice how she's singing. She's almost gasping for breath between the words. This is the way she actually recorded, but she had a little bit more control over it. She wasn't that loud. I added more volume to those breaths on purpose to show you situations that do happen. I've had a few singers that are that type, where they gasp for breath between lyrics. They sing, then they breathe in, and then they sing, and then breathe in again. This is something that can be annoying. If I heard this in a mix, it would be like, wow, that person sounds like they're gasping for breath. Are they okay? Naturally, we don't want to hear these breaths so loud. I can use a gate to remove them, but let's go ahead and do that real quick. All right, so I'm going to bring the threshold down over here.
Let your light shine for all to
Threshold
see.
is allowing it to
Start a fire
open and close.
in my soul, fan the flame and make it grow. So there's no doubt
Somewhere around
or
here.
deny. Let it burn so brightly that everyone around can see.
Now, just listening to that, I've removed all the breaths. But honestly, if I throw this into a mix, a singer who never breathes, we may not notice it immediately, but our subconscious will be, there's something wrong. We are wired as humans to be able to hear the breaths, and we know that things are okay. We know that that person is breathing. This comes into play especially if you've had children. You listen to your children when they're sleeping and so forth because you want to hear them breathing. You want to know that they're okay. We are wired this way, and if we hear no breathing, we start getting worried. We start something is triggering inside of us. Something's wrong. If I heard a song with a singer never taking a breath in the song, I would really feel kind of different. I would like, this doesn't sound right. Even if we are sampling vocals, we still have breaths between different words. If we grabbed every single word and just placed them in, it would sound very robotic. something isn't quite right. So, listening to that, yeah, sure, I could add a little attack to make sure there's no clipping on the beginning. Yes, I can hold it open a little bit, but I'm still gating out because of the minus 100 dB. So,
let your light shine for all to see. Start a fire in my soul. Fan the...
You see right there, it doesn't still sound natural. So, instead of bringing it down 100 dB, this is one of those 2% of the time where you're not going to be gain reduction full amount. So what am I doing by bringing this back down? And I'm going to use minus 6 dB, 6 or 7. What I'm doing there is, remember, the gain reduction only goes down 7 dB. So what that means is now the breaths are still there, they're just not as loud.
Let your light shine for all to see. Start a fire in my soul. Fan the flame.
Now it sounds
and
more
make
natural.
It grow.
Because
so
yes,
there's no...
she's breathing between words. I can hear her breathing, but it's not so loud that it draws my attention away from the lyrics. If I feel like, oh, I still need a little bit more gain reduction, I want them to be a little softer, well then go minus 15 dB.
Let your light shine for all to see. Start a fire in my soul. Fan the flame and make it grow.
She's by no means as drastic now as before. If I bypass this, you could hear the difference.
Let your light shine for all to see. Start a fire in my soul. Fan the flame and make it grow. So there...
Like right there, especially. Right there before she goes, so there's. Bring it in and hitting that spot, you'll see it cleans it up a lot better.
Let your light shine for all to see. Start a fire in my soul. Fan the flame and make it grow. So there's no doubt.
And I may even want to make it a little bit more natural. Like do the fade a little bit. Increase the attack. Increase the release. Tweaking these guys out afterwards, along with the gain reduction, can give you a much more natural sounding vocal that is no longer drawing your attention to her breathing. These are all tools that you as engineers that you could control a lot of the aspects of the singer. And most people don't even realize that we have these tools. They just hear the end product and they fall in love with the song. They don't know what may have gone into the song. Singers do not put out perfect performances all the time where everything is perfect. Their breathing, their EQ, the mic placement, and everything. You, as engineers, are helping them get that sound. And this is why you're learning how to do this correctly. You're learning these, fundamentals to really help you. Now, I mentioned that there's two features on this gate that aren't normal to most gates. Hysteresis and look ahead. Let me go back to the snare. It's actually a better one to show it on. Okay, so solo this guy. Open up the gate again. Okay, so we left off right here. You'll notice hysteresis is at 0 dB. Look ahead is at 0 milliseconds. The look ahead is strictly for digital units. We cannot do this if we're not in digital software. Look ahead cannot be done on an analog noise gate because there's no physical way that we could look before time. Look ahead, just like it says, it physically looks ahead of time to figure out the attack and the different things. So if I tell it to look ahead 8 milliseconds before this threshold point, it starts working the attack before the threshold point gets started, so that way your gain reduction amount and the opening of this is more natural sounding. The other one, hysteresis, works off of a different principle. On my snare, let's go right here. So remember, if I have my threshold only opening way up here at the top, it immediately closes, right? Well, I have my hold and my release to allow that decay. But is every single snare always the same length? No. There are some snares that might last longer. And my decay, and my release, I should say, on this guy doesn't last as long as that one single snare, which is longer. Well, what happens there is that my snares now all match each other, yes, and decay, but maybe we don't want that. We want it to follow the drummer the way he intended it. Maybe he's muting some of the snare sounds, and then other ones he plays nice and lets them ring outwards. In other words, last longer. My hysteresis is there to help with that. What it does is, think of it as another threshold. This threshold, being -7, is when the gate physically opens. So the gate will not open until we hit -7 level wise. If I have my hysteresis at 0 dB, that means my threshold, when it closes, the second threshold, you might say, when the level goes below the threshold, it will be triggered at -7. So both the attack or the opening and the closing of the gate work off of the -7. But if I have this, and I'm going to use here, let's go to -20. Now what happens is my threshold opens the gate at only when its signal level goes above -7. My gate opens. My gate now to close will not go the trigger at -7. It will actually, you add these together, and it won't close until the signal decays down to -27. So let's get rid of this release just to show you. And with a hysteresis of -20, you'll see it kind of still follows the snare decay. But whether it's short or long, it will follow it a lot more like the original player set it up. Now you may still have to mess around with a little bit of release just to, work it together. So that way you don't get this cutoff on the longer ones. I think I have it set too high. So hopefully you get to see how the hysteresis could help us. This is an extra tool. Is it in every single every single gate? No. Only certain gates will have the hysteresis feature, which gives you 2 thresholds. The one for the opening and the one for the closing. The look ahead, another feature that only gets triggered by certain, plug-in type gates. Can I find this on a guitar pedal, a noise gate guitar pedal, or a rack mount gate? No, you won't be able to have this feature. It's just physically impossible. All right, so you've seen how to use a gate. You see how basic it is? Pretty simple, it's straightforward. Noise gates remove the noise. We use it to get rid of all that amount of bleed through off of microphones. You could also use this live on a vocalist, for instance. You could use a noise gate and you set it up so that way it opens up and it has a long decay to follow the singer so you don't get that breath situation. But you use it to open and close the microphone. In other words, I've got a live microphone on stage. The microphone is off until the singer walks up to the microphone and starts singing. Otherwise, the microphone stays off. It's closed. As soon as the singer starts singing, it opens up, stays open, and lets the singer sing. This allows for less chances of feedback on your sound system, and it also helps clean up the sound system's noise. Being that instead of having a microphone that's picking up, the people running around on stage and everything else that's happening up on stage, that signal does not go through until the physical singer grabs the microphone and starts singing. We can use the gate to really help us in live situations. You will notice gates are used a lot in live situations. We'll use gates on the drums to help clean up the drum track when it's live, on the singers to help clean up the audio again on that whole live session. So it's used a lot. Now I'm going to show you some tricks just because we've got some time, and that's the last part of this assignment. Is I actually show you how to start now, because this one's pretty simple. You will be adding a gate to the guitar track, to the kick track, and the second guitar track. You'll gate out the noise. With the guitar track, in fact, you'll hear how noisy it is. It's a very noisy guitar. All that guitar amplifier noise is something that is very common. A lot of guitarists will actually buy what they call a noise gate pedal that fits in their chain to be able to get rid of that noise, because that amplifier is full on, open, fully turned up to get that distorted sound, and it's very noisy up on stage. So if you're a guitarist, you're probably familiar with noise gates to use on your guitars. You could clean up your guitar sound. You're going to do this now because we're in the studio and we didn't want you to use a noise gate. We wanted to control it in the mixdown. In recordings, usually you don't put a noise gate on your system. The guitarists actually, we do it afterwards so we can tailor it to fit the song better. But you're going to actually set up that noise gate to clean up that track. Now, like I said, I'm going to show you a neat trick. This kick track right here, let's go ahead and gate that really quick, because I'm going to show you how I can use a noise gate besides having it. All right, let me get rid of that effect real quick. So, kick track. All right. You guys hear nothing but a kick. Okay, now let's say you're doing a mix down, and you're the song you're recording or mixing down is supposed to be a dance song, and the band tells you, we love the way our drums sound, but is there any way we could make this more dancey? We want to give it that 808 feel. The 808 feel, as I was saying, is actually one of the terms that a lot of engineers will use, or a lot of bands. It's got to do with the TR-808, the Roland TR-808. It was came out in the 80s and used in every single hip hop song, the early 80s and 90s. 808 and 909 were probably the most famous drum machines ever. And it's like someone said, yes, it's that boom that you hear. So when you hear a lot of dance tracks and you hear that, we call it a drop kick, that boom hit, it's not at all a kick drum. It sometimes could be a mix between a kick drum and the actual drop sound to make a dancier feel to a natural sounding drums. If you're using just an 808 drum machine, that's a whole different story. You don't need to do this. But let's say I'm using a real drum kit and I want it to still have that feel of that drop kick. What I could do is right here, I'm going to solo the kick so we hear the kick. And on this track, you can see I've got a gate happening there. On this channel, I actually don't have any audio. Let me zoom in here for you guys. Everybody will notice that there is no audio on this track. This extra info track, as I called it. What I've done is I've added a test oscillator. Let me bypass the gate, let you hear what the test oscillator sounds like. All right, of course I have to unmute it. So right now it's pretty low. If you're on headphones, you may or may not hear it. I'm going to pitch it up. It's a sine wave. All right, now, if I hit play, a kick and that sine wave, it just doesn't cut it. It's not following the kick. Here's a cool feature. I'm going to turn the gate back on. The gate can be set up to be triggered by not the audio that's on that track, on that channel. I could trigger from what we call a side chain. The side chain, notice I chose the kick track to trigger this gate to open. So now imagine I've got that test tone, and it sounds best at 56 Hertz. You select your actual frequency. I tuned it to make it sound better with that kick drum sound. So when I hit play, and you're going to listen to both the kick and that sine wave, the tone, playing together, and you're going to get that boom sound. Now, bring back the threshold a little bit. So you should be hearing, and I'm going to bring it up in pitch so everybody could hear it. It may not sound correct, but you can hear that tone following the kick. And if I want it to last longer, well, bring up the release. If I want it to be shorter, I'm now making that 808 type sound fit. I'm going to bring it back down to the 50 or here's 70, so at least people can still hear it through their headphones. I can also blend whether I want less of the original kick and more of that tone. Or a combination. And yes, I know I'm clipping. Which brings up another thing. Today's standards, the 808 drum sound is now being distorted on purpose to give you a whole different set of harmonics. If I wanted that sound, I could also do that. Let's come over here to after the gate, and I could either add a distortion pedal or overdrive, any of these. I'm going to go ahead and, let's go ahead and overdrive it. And I'm going to go ahead and blend these. So I could give this a whole different feel. So there you go. You can now make up your own, everything from industrial to hip hop to rap, to, all the different dance styles of music. You can manipulate, of course, how that kick drum sounds by using your envelope. If I want it to be an original kick sound and then the fade in of that low frequency, I just bring up the attack. You see how you have more of the original sound first, and this takes a little bit to come in. Or right on top of it. I even get a little bit of clicking sound there because I put it at 0. So I may want to back it up a couple milliseconds, unless I want the click. All right, so that's how a lot of engineers are creating that sound. If they have a real live kit and they want to still give it a dance feel. So imagine that kick drum along with the original. You're able to control how things feel. That's using a noise gate. Now, I worked with a lot of hip hop. I worked with a lot of Miami bass, but I also did a lot of stuff with EDM styles of music as an engineer. I actually did so many different styles. It was kind of crazy. I'm known for reggae. I'm known for doing a lot of EDM and Miami bass albums, as well as also some techno albums. Let's show you what we could do techno-wise. If I've got a remix and I'm gonna solo this, I'm gonna bypass our gate first of all. Hit play. So, nice little string sound. Okay, so that's what they recorded. They've got a nice string sound, whether it was keyboard sense or real strings, whatever it might be. And then they tell you, hey, we'd like to do a remix. Is there any way you could try to create a remix out of this? You'll see that, I do a lot of fun remixes. I was known for that as well. But first thing I could think of is, well, why not use a gate to open and close? In other words, chop up the audio. So this time, instead of using the strings to open up the gate, I'm going to use something else to open up that gate. I'm setting it up external, and you can see I've got it set up to trigger track or instrument 1. I called it trigger track just so you guys could follow through, and all of this stuff is explained also in the instructions to show you how I did this, so you can learn a little bit more in depth how to use a gate. But if I was given this, I'd say, why not do this? I'm going to use the hi-hat track. That's what I'm using to trigger. I'm triggering that gate to open up on 8th notes or 16th notes. And I end up with something like this. See, like there, it's 8th notes. 16th notes. And if I want to change the feel, I play with my envelope. Let's say I want it to last longer. Or shorten it. Very staccato. If I want it to be slower on the attack. I want it to hold a little bit longer. You can see how I could give those strings a completely different feel, and it's by gating them or transforming them. If you're familiar with some of the old school DJs, Grandmaster Flash, he was known for transforming. He would sit there and use his faders to cut in and out the song. Very similar. I could sit here and gate out according to whatever I wish to trigger to gate out the sound and giving it that choppy feel. I've now turned that string section into more of a, EDM style song. All right, so hopefully with those tricks, it got you guys kind of inspired. You could really start thinking about how you could use gates besides just using them for cleaning up tracks. Again, learn the rules and you could break them in great ways. Great example of that. These two things I heard Grandmaster Flash and I was like, oh, I can't do that, but I could use a gate to do it. And I thought out of the box and started doing stuff like that way back in the 80s and 90s. Same thing with like the drop kick. This was a trick that I kind of learned over time. I've heard about it and I knew that they used the gate to do it. And I said, well, how could we do that? I know how to use a gate. So I created